the Chicano art movement and its interest in oppression and liberty had to do with also precursors in the civil rights movement and awarenesses about blacks and their African ancestry and Native Americans and their experience as indigenous and oppressed people in this country. So that to some degree, a sense of brotherhood with other Native Americans set the stage for this interest in spirituality and elements of that life, even though, as you say, they were elitist. I don't know enough about the area to know. That's another possibility. Another one is that the Chicano set himself in opposition to the Anglo-majority society. In his need to develop an identity, he set himself in opposition to being different from the technology, the sense of distance from one's family, the disengagement that we saw Anglos as having, their mechanistic interests, the fact that they did not have a soul, in our opinion, so that what we showed them that we had was definitely a soul. So maybe that had something to do with our need to kind of reify this spirituality in a more simplistic way without pursuing, as you say, into a more critical view of it. That's another possibility. One other possibility that I've thought about is the notion of a developmental line in terms of a group life and a group history. That as people move along, they reclaim or go back to retrieve certain elements that are actually moving along in the culture. They're elements of the culture. They may be customs, they may be values, patterns, behaviors, attitudes. They move along, but some of them get locked into time spans because the elements don't all move at the same time and in the same way. But they make up what we experience as culture. So that at some point along this developmental line, we go back and pick up things. So that for those of us in the 60s, what mattered to us was the pre-Columbian sense of our identity, our culture. What is important to a lot of the Chicano youth that I see in the 80s is a retrieval and a going back to patriotismo, to the zoot suit, that in other words, we look back at our history as a way of understanding the contemporary setting and we select from it. Or we may not even select, maybe it comes to us, moves in certain ways that we don't even understand because culture is so dynamic, but that in some way there is possibly a line. So that may be why in the 60s those were the elements that mattered, whereas they are not necessarily the elements that predominate in the 80s in terms of the visual images. That was basically some of my ideas about why this happened. I do agree with you to some extent about the way in which it was employed, but I think that your position doesn't take into consideration other elements that have to do with just the nature of culture and the need or value for a spiritual center. I look at some of the work I'm doing now as an altarista with other altaristas. And I'm academy educated. I have a family background that has to do with folk arts and carvings and home tabletop altars and my experience in the Catholic Church. All of those make up to some degree the way in which I look at altars, despite all of my education, as some sense of a ceremonial center. And that is a position that I've only come to recently, because for a very long time I didn't see that kind of work, the work that I was doing, as having anything to do with religion. I denied it, even though it sprung up out of originally response of Dia de los Muertos. So I'm saying that there are certain manifestations that we have in our art forms that have something to do with elements of the culture that keep right on moving, even though their forms change. And I think part of our error in understanding what we do is that we confuse the substance of culture with the form. The form is tradition. The substance is something else altogether. And that substance changes form from historical to contemporary time, and that it's fluid and it adapts in some way. And I think we need to look at how our forms change.